Baruch Hashem, we're up to Parshas Balak. I want to talk about two things first at the very beginning, and then focus on the first pasuk of Parshas Balak, and we'll look at it with the commentaries, and we'll go from there. So, first thing I want to mention about Parshas Balak is this man Bilam. It was a tragic figure. Bilam is the prophet in Parashas Balak, who he's gone. The Balak goes to him and asks him to curse the Jewish people, and Bilam curses the Jewish people. Why do we care about Bilam's ability to curse? Because Bilam was a tremendous prophet. The Torah tells us at the end of the parasha, the end of the Torah, not the end of the parasha, it says, there will never be a prophet amongst the Jewish people as great as Moses. And the Midrash says amongst the Jewish people, there will never be a prophet as great as Moses. But not amongst the Jewish people. Indeed, there will be a prophet who's even greater than Moses. And who is that prophet? That was this prophet Bilam. Now, Bilam knew the moment where God got angry in the morning, says the Gemara, that he knew that special moment. And so he was able to arouse God's anger more than anybody else in the world. Hold on one second. So because Bilam knew how to arouse God's anger more than anybody else in the world, he had this special power. But yet, even though he had this special power, he used this power, this tremendous spiritual strength. He used it for bad and not for good. And that's one of the dangers of spiritual talent. That just like there's talent in the world, let's say you have a talent for making money, or you have a talent for being strong, or you have a talent for being funny. You could use any of these talents for good or for bad. And Bilam used his talent, he used it for bad. It's especially dangerous when you have the talent of speech and you use it for bad, because that's what Bilam did. We learn in today's Daf Yomi the story of Rabbi Alexandri. Rabbi Alexandri, whenever, here, let me read the Gemara directly. I'll read it for everybody so you can see this. The Gemara, it says in the text, it says that Rabbi Alexandri would come to a place, this is in Avodah Zarah 19b. Machras Rabbi Alexandri. Rabbi Alexandri would always make the proclamation. And he would say, whenever he would come to a place, Man bayechaye, man bayechaye. Who wants life? Who wants a life? Kanuf vasu kol yamalagabe. Meaning to say, Rabbi Alexandri came to a place, and he always said, and he would get there, and he'd go into the town square, and he says, I'm selling the secret of life. And people want to know, okay, what's the secret of life? Everybody gather around him. Who doesn't want to hear the secret of life? Who wants to know the secret of life? Right? Everybody wants to. So you gather everybody around him to hear the secret of life. And people gather around and they say, have one chai, give us the secret of life. And what would he say? He would say, Mi says, whoever wants to have life, just guard your mouth from speaking bad. Guard your mouth from speaking bad and you'll have life. Because language is what separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom, our sophisticated language. Sure, other animals have a limited language, but ours has the most sophisticated language of all. And that's what makes us have human life. And so he says, whoever wants life, make sure you don't say something bad. So Bilam had this potential for good, but he used it for bad. The chayim v'amaves, the life and the death, is in the hands of the tongue. And Bilam used his tongue in our portion. He was using it to curse people. In the end, he was unable to do it because God prevented him from fully doing it. But Bilam is the one who has this potential, but he used it for bad. And then, just to finish off the text of the Gemara says that maybe a person will say, listen, Natsarti l'shoni meira, Let's say a person will say, listen, I don't need to do anything. I'll just prevent myself from speaking bad. I'll go and I'll sleep all day. But no, that's not enough, because the verse says, Sur me'rav aseh tov. The verse says, depart from evil and do good. And what is good? Ki lekach tov natati lachem torati al tazavu. The tov refers to the Torah. Ein tov el Torah. So it's not enough it's not enough, simply speaking, not to say anything bad. You also have to do good. And how do you do good? By bringing positive spirituality into the world, by bringing positive spiritual energy into the world. And this is where Rabbi Alexandria was off. And that was the real problem with Bilam, that Bilam had this tremendous potential. And this tremendous potential to be, because God sent prophets to the nations, just like he sent prophets to the Jewish people. And God sent the prophets to the nations, but Bilam used his potential for bad. And he misused his power of speech. The Midrash and Vayikra Rabbah tells about a similar incident. That there was, it's a slightly different story than this story of Rabbi Alexandri, but I'll just share with you so you're aware of both stories. So the Midrash story is that there was a guy, not Rabbi Alexandri, but a guy who sold spices and perfumes, and he would go to all the cities that were in the north of Israel and the Galilee, near Tzipori, and he would proclaim, "Who is the one who wants to buy the drug of life? Who wants to buy the elixir of life?" And everybody ran after him. Who wouldn't want to? And Rabbi Yanai, who was sitting in his house and heard these things, went out to go buy the drug of life. And he said, "I'll show you what the real drug of life is." Rabbi Yanai showed him, "Don't sell me your snake oil. I'll show you the real drug of life. The real drug of life is this verse from Psalms 34:13. Who is the one who wants life? The one who does not speak bad." So this is the first thing I wanted to share with you, and that is that the story of Bilam is the tragic story of a man who misused his spiritual potential, misused the power of life, and used it for bad. And every time we open our mouths, we have the ability to use it to bring tremendous life to the world, or tragically, we have the ability to bring negative energy, negativity into the world, and death to the world. And so that's one of the takeaways that we have to take from our parsha, from the story of Bilam, of what it's doing here, is to teach us the power of using our language for good. That's lesson number 1 from our portion. Now we come to lesson number 2. And this is just I always like to share the scribal oddities from the portion, because I'm writing Torahs. I write Torahs. I write the Torah every day, and so therefore, when I have something that I think maybe a lot of people aren't aware of because they're not involved in the Torah, then I want to share with you. So the Torah, most of the Torahs today, the standard Torah, is made up of 245 columns. There's another standard Torah which is 248 columns, but the standard Torah, most of the Torahs, are 245 columns, which consists of, each column is 42 lines. There are 42 lines corresponding to 42 journeys in the wilderness, and there are 245 columns, and they're made, most of the texts of the Torah, most of the pieces of the Torah there are 62 pieces of parchment that make up a Torah. 58 of these are pieces of parchment with 4 columns on them. There are 4 that are 4 special pieces of parchment. The first one, that's Bereshit. That has only 3 columns because you start in the middle of the page. The last one, and then the 2 ones with Shira. You have the Song of the Sea, which is written like brick on top of a brick, and the Song of Hazinu, which is written in 2 separate like poetic columns. So those are the 4 special pages. Now, there's there's another concept, which is that our custom today is that every column, the first letter of every column, does anybody know what letter it is? Every single column of the Torah, with the exception of 5, begins with the following letter. Anybody know what letter it begins with?
Bet.
Bet would be,
Yes.
no, the first column begins with bet, but
Olive?
every other column.
Olive?
No.
Nope.
Yes.
The first, okay, I'll give you guys the answer. Otherwise, we're just these are good guesses. These are very good guesses. But every single column in the Torah begins with, exception of, were you going to say something, Aviva or Mordechai? I saw that you.
The Vav.
Excellent.
That's the Mordechai.
Aviva. Mordechai is stark today. Mordechai is holding. Okay, so Mordechai said the letter Vav. Excellent. So there's a way to remember this called Bikashmo, Bet Yud Hey, Shin Mem Vav. So there are 6 columns of the Torah that have to begin with those letters, and 5 of them are not the letter Vav. Every other column in the Torah begins with the letter Vav. The Vav can mean, what does Vav mean? It means the letter Vav, but it also means like a Vav in the Mishkan means a hook, and it means a hook. And it also means Vav is also connecting letter, and Va, the Vayidaber Moshe, and Moshe spoke. So the Vav is connecting. So every page of the Torah is connected to the previous page. Every conversation we have is connected to the previous conversation. And why am I mentioning this? Because there are, I said, 5 columns that do not have this connection. The Bet of Bereshit, that does not begin with a Vav. There is, during the blessings of Jacob, is the Yud for Yehuda. Then there's a Hey at the beginning of Shemot. And then in the Torah reading for Yom Kippur, the Sin of Sa'ir. And then the last column that does not begin with a Vav is the column that begins with the word Matovo. How beautiful are your tents, or Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. So those columns do not, but every other column in the Torah begins with the letter Vav. In order, I think, to make this point that the Torah is a continuation. We're just a link in the tradition. We're just another chain in the tradition. And maybe this is what bothered Bilam so much, because Bilam looked at the tents of the Jewish people, and he was obviously jealous. Matovu Alecha Yaakov, how beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places of O Israel. Also, this week's parsha, just one more thing before we go to the first verse, that this week's parsha is, of course, the most, of all the years that we read the parsha, this is the parsha that maybe it's the most in the news. This portion was talked about more this year than any other year, because when the Jewish people, when the land of Israel waged war against Iran this year, and there was an operation, a military operation to try to destroy the nuclear weapons that were aimed at the Jewish people. The Jewish people called this, the Israeli government called this operation a nation will rise like a lion. And that's a verse in this week's portion. In chapter 23, verse 24, Hein am kalavi yakum, a nation will rise like a lion. Am kalavi yakum. And v'cha'ari yitnathal. Let me just read the Rashi on this portion so we see exactly what that verse means. Chapter 23, verse 20. This was in the news. You heard the rising lion. Am kalavi yakum. This was the operation today in the White House. They're talking about it. The president of the United States and the prime minister of Israel are talking about this exact verse. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about this verse. Hein am kalavi yakum, chapter 23, verse 24, which Bilam said to the Jewish people, Behold, a people that rises like a lion, uka'ari nasa, and raises itself like a lion. Lo yishkav ad yochal teref. It will not lie down until he consumes his prey. V'dam chalim yishten, and drinks the blood of the slain ones. So we have two expressions of a lion here, lavi and ari. These are two expressions of a lion. Let's see what Rashi says. Rashi says about this verse that, and we'll just translate this verse so when you understand it, when you read the Torah portion, when you read the news, you see the reference that this is what it's referring to. A nation like a lion will rise, kishehim omdim mishnatam, when they get up from their sleep, shachrit, hein mitgabrim, when the Jewish people get up in the morning, they exert themselves like an awesome lion, and like a lion to grab the commandments. Lobosh talis likro shema uaniach tefillin, and to put on tefillin. So the Rashi understands this verse spiritually. What does it mean we will rise like a lion? That means that we rise like a lion in battle to fight the enemies. No, it means when we rise in the morning, the very first word that the Shulchan Aruch says, I'm going to bring you the Shulchan Aruch. The very first word that the Shulchan Aruch says is, rise in the morning like a lion. Hold on, let me get it for you. Just take 1 second. Here. Here's the code of Jewish law. The code of Jewish law, called the Shulchan Aruch. The very first word that it says is Yiskaber Ka'ari. A person should be strong like a lion. Ma'amod baboker, to get up in the morning to serve his creator. Shi'eh hu me'orer hashachar. He has to awaken the morning dawn. He has to awaken the morning dawn. So that's what it means. Ka'ari. He gets up in the morning like a lion, and he has to be the one to awaken the dawn. So that's exactly what this verse is meaning. This verse is a spiritual verse telling us, according to Rashi, not that and this is where our strengths are not in our F-35s, although we need those, and that are not in our B-2 bombers, although we need those. Our strength is waking up in the morning like a lion, to exert ourselves like an awesome lion, like a lavi and an ari. There are 6 names in the Bible for a lion. Two of them are a lavi and ari, and then there's, anybody know any other names for a lion in the Torah? There is a shachal, that's another type of lion. There's a kfir. Kfir is another type of lion. Then there is the layish and the shachatz. These are the 6 different types of lions that the Bible refers to. So that's what it means to wake up in the morning like a lion. It means to rise like a lion. It means to get up, to wear our talis, to recite the Shema, and to put on tefillin. So I just want to point out for you that there's a difference in the Tanakh between when a lion represents physical strength and when a lion represents spiritual strength. When a lion is depicted as crouching or lying down, then it represents physical strength or military strength. But when a lion is depicted as rising, as it is in our parsha, then it depicts spiritual strength. So ironically, when they chose Am Kalavi Yakum, now Bibi Netanyahu probably didn't know this Rashi, but he was depicting spiritual strength, that the true strength comes from the spiritual. A very powerful idea from this week's portion. And then it states, Lo Yishkav Ad Yochal Teref, that it means he will not lie down until he consumes his prey. What does that mean? Rashi says, Balayla, at night, on his bed, he does not lie down until he eats and destroys not his actual prey, but kol hamazik habala tarfo, anything which comes to cause him harm. How does he destroy it? Keitzad Korei es Shema. He recites the Shema on his bed. Umafkid Rucho. Gives over his spirit for safekeeping. Biyad Hamakom. That's how he destroys it. Through spiritual strength by reciting the Shema at night. Ba'machane v'gayes. V'hazikam HaKadosh Baruch Hu shomrim. And nocham nochamtam umapilam chalolim. If a military camp comes to damage them, God will guard them and fight their battles and make the enemy fall slain. That's the first part that Rashi shares. The second explanation Rashi shares, again, the first explanation of Rashi is this expression, Am Kalavi Yakum, the nation will rise like a lion, is through its spiritual strength we will gain strength. But then Rashi simply says, what does this mean? Rashi says, Kitargumo, like Onkelos translates it, like the Targum translates it. And what is this a reference to? So Targum Onkelos, who is the Aramaic translation, we learned about him actually in the Talmud 2 weeks ago. Onkelos was the nephew of Titus, who converted to the Jewish people, and he not only converted, he converted alongside with him military regiments that were sent to convert him. He ended up converting them. And he reads this verse, behold, a people who arises like an awesome lion and raises itself like a lion, it will not rest in its land until it kills prey and inherits the property of the nations. Meaning to say that this is not a comment on the past, it's a comment on the future, that the nation will rise like a lion and will conquer its prey and conquer the land. That Bilam was predicting that the Israelites would conquer the Canaanites. V'dam chalam yishteh nitnabeh, he's prophesizing that Moshe would not die, she'ein Moshe mate, ad sheyapil malchei Midyan chalalim, until he would make the kings of Midyan fallen, and Bilam would be killed with them. As it states that Bilam ben Be'orak Koseim argu b'nei Yisrael b'char v'chaleim. So this is the verse that everyone, of course, has to be aware of, because this is the verse in the news. Let me just pause for a second before we go on and talk about the first verse. Let me just see if anybody has any comments. Okay, so going back now to the very beginning of the portion, we right away notice also that, I want to point it out, anytime it is unusual that the verse starts, the portion starts with pasuk bet. And normally when the portion starts with the second verse, you would say, okay, well, no big deal. Who are the ones who made the verses? Those were not made by the men of the Masorah, the Anshe Masorah. Those were made by the people who put together the Christian Bibles. But here it's unusual also because the last verse of last week's portion it begins the new paragraph. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael vayachanu b'arvot Moab. And so therefore, chapter 22 really is beginning a new paragraph in the Torah. So it is unusual that the Torah begins with, that the portion begins with its own, actually, I'm not sure. In Torah Chaim, it doesn't have like that. I have to check this. Strike what I just said. Strike it from the record. Okay. So now let's go to the first pasuk in the portion, and I found a tremendous work in Rabbi Mintz's library with a lot of the commentaries listed there. So I want to go over it very carefully. So it says, "Vayar Balak ben Tzipor et kol asher asa Yisrael Amori." That Balak, the son of Tzipor, saw all that the Jewish people had done to the Amorites. So first of all, who is Tzipor? Balak, the son of Tzipor. Do you know who Tzipor is? Doesn't tell us. This is the only time he appears in the Bible. We don't have any other reference to him. So we don't know who he is. We have no idea who Tzipor is. We do know perhaps about Balak because Sephono tells us a little bit about him, but even Balak himself, some want to say that the Balaturim wants to say that we can look it out from the last Balak. He came with luck. He came with the desire to curse. That's what the Balaturim says. But it's really very little is known about him. We know that he comes from the place of Petorah. That Bilam is in Petorah al Nahar. So we know that Bilam is in Aram Naharaim, but we don't know anything about Balak. We don't know anything about Balak, and we certainly don't know anything about his father, Tzipor. Rashi says, what do we know about him? Rashi says, Balak, the son of Tzipor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Amar, he said the following. We have to read it in the context of last week's portion. That these two kings, Sichon and Og, who were defeated in the last week's portion, Shahinu bituchem aleim, we were relying upon them. Why were they relying upon them? Because last week's portion said that the kings of Canaan paid the kings of Sichon, paid Sichon, the king of the Amorites, for protection. And that's why Sichon didn't let Bnei Yisrael pass through to attack Canaan. So Moab must have also had protection. So Sichon was the one who oversaw, basically, he was the last bulwark against the march of the Bnei Yisrael. And so now Balak saw that Sichon was defeated. So he says, what are we going to do? So we relied on Sichon. Og was the king of Bashan, and Sichon was the king of the Amorites. What are we going to do? Lo amdu bifneim. They were unable to defeat the Jewish people. We don't have our own weapons. How are we going to defeat them? Anu achas kama v'kama. So therefore, Wafikach vayagar Moab. Moab was very frightened as a result. That's what he saw. What did he see? He saw that these two kings in last week's portion were defeated, Sichon and Og. The commentaries talk about how the word vayar, he saw, is denotes an understanding that's much less than he heard. Vayishma, the word he heard, implies understood. Vayar implies he didn't really understand. And so So that's what the commentaries say. Okay, so let me share with you what some of the traditional commentaries say about Balak. This is what Sephono says. Sephono says, Adam Muforsam Lemulmad Milchama, that he was a person who was a well-known, basically expert in war. He was a well-known expert in war. As it says, Hatov Tov Atami Balak ben Tzipor Melch Moab. As it says in Judges, in the story of Yiftach, they said, are you better in battle than Balak, the son of Tzipor? We read this verse last week in the Haftorah. That's why it doesn't have to say who he is, because everybody knew about him. He was known as this very special general. And he saw that the Jewish people wanted to go through the land of Sichon, and when they didn't want to let them through, that they destroyed him. And he saw that the Jewish people were being victorious, not in the normal manner. He saw that their usual battle was not being successful. So therefore, he saw that we need to attack them in a different way. And Rashi also says this. Rashi says this in the commentary to verse 4. So they're going to, Moab said to the elders of Midian, they're going to chew up our surroundings. So Rashi says, what did Moab see to take counsel from Midian? Because they hated each other. That's what Rashi says. Why is Moab? We see all of a sudden this whole partnership against the Bnei Israel. We saw Moab and Midian getting together. But Balak ben Zippor was the king of Moab, and he's now taking counsel from the elders of Midian, and then they're going to go and get a third person, which is Bilam, who's coming from Aram Naharaim. So they have that whole part of the world is teaming up against the Jewish people. So Rashi points out, don't they hate each other? Because it says Amakeh. Doesn't it? It says in the verse in Genesis, Amaket Midian b'stei Moab, who struck Midian in the field of Moab. That Midian came and fought a battle against Moab. So why are they together? Because they hated the Jewish people so much they would get together. So that's what motivated them. That motivated them was their hatred of the Jewish people. And why was Moab taking advice from Midian? Because they saw that the Bnei Israel were being victorious, not in the usual manner. So they said, Manhigam shel elu b'Midian niskadel. Balak noticed that Moshe came from Midian. So he said, because that's where, when he ran away from Paro, he ran to Midian. He said, so we have to see, since they came from Midian, we have to see where their strength is. So let's go to the Midianites and ask where they're getting their strength from. So the Midianites said, Ein kocho ela b'fiv. Moshe's strength comes from his mouth. It's so ironic that the enemy sees the strength of Moshe in his mouth. When the first words that Moshe says to God, I can't do it because I am ani arel sefasayim. My lips are uncircumcised. So Moshe talks about his mouth as being his weakness, but others saw his greatest strength was his mouth. So they said, we have to come with a person who is very powerful in the mouth, and that's why they turned to Bilam at this time. And so that's why Bilam, they came with this concept, this idea that we can defeat the Jewish people with their mouth. Hold on one second. Now, who was Bilam? I'll just say one thing and then we'll go to some of the Hasidic explanations on this. Bilam was a person who was like a spiritual mercenary. That's how the Talmud understands. The Talmud in Sanhedrin 105a says, Bilam below Am, that he was a person without a nation. He was a spiritual guru for hire. That's one approach of his. Okay, so now let's turn to some of the Hasidic explanations on this first verse. We saw some of the classic commentaries, and now let's go to some of the Hasidic explanations about this first verse. So first of all, we have to go to the Chafetz Chaim, because again, remember, I always like to point out the scribal oddities. So this week's portion has another scribal oddity. It's not the only parsha like this, but it is a scribal oddity that normally the passages of the Torah have paragraph breaks, which are called psuchos v'stumos, and this portion does not have any. Doesn't have any psuchos or stumos. There's no breaks. It's just one straight long narrative. There's no indentations at all. And why is that the case? So the Chafetz Chaim, who we start off our discussion today with, says the Chafetz Chaim that really Bilam was a prophet, and his prophecy came from the highest level, and he indeed said, all I can do is say from that which God puts in my mouth. So Bilam had this spiritual talent. He had this tremendous strength, this ability to prophesize.
but he was missing something. He was missing an aspect of the prophecy that the Jewish prophets had. And that's where his defect came along. And that was that even though he had these prophecies, he didn't analyze the prophecy. He didn't look closer and he didn't study it. It was superficial. So on the one hand, he had this very great ability to get the word of God into his mouth. On the other hand, he just approached it in a superficial manner. And that is why that's symbolized by the lack of space in the lack of spaces, because the reason the Rashi says at the beginning of Vayikra that the reason why there are spaces in the Torah is to give Moshe the ability to look more closely and to understand. And so Bilam didn't do this. He just accepted in a superficial manner. And so therefore, as a consequence, he really didn't have a deep understanding. And this is symbolized by the lack of breaks in the portion. That's the first thing. A second idea is, why is this portion called Parshas Balak, which is, first of all, it could even be called Bilam. Bilam was a greater man in the sense that he was a prophet. Balak was just the king of the Moabites. Who was he? He was a nobody. He was even the enemy of the Jewish people. So there are 54 portions in the Torah, and of these 54, 5 are called after men. Who are the 5? Noach, Yisro, Korach, Balak, and Pinchas. Now we know Noach was righteous because it says Noach ish tzaddik. Noach was a righteous man. Yisro, we know that Yisro deserves a portion because he came up with an idea which added on another concept in the Torah, which is which was that Moshe should delegate judges. Korach, okay, why was Korach get a portion? Well, the Talmud actually says in Sanhedrin that he knew the whole Torah and he knew how to make leap years, etc. So he had a lot of potential. And he was very well known and famous. Pinchas, we know why Pinchas gets a portion, because he aroused he was zealous for God, and he sanctified God's name. And Pinchas is also Eliyahu. But why was Balak? What did Balak do? He was a nobody. What did Balak do to get a whole portion named after him? Well, he said the only time we see about his father was in the context of Balak, the son of Tzipor. So what did Balak do? The Gemara says, the Gemara in Sota 47 says that it was in the merit of the 42 sacrifices that Balak brought. Every time Bilam said, go here and bring sacrifices to God, Balak did that. So as a consequence of this, he merited to have as a great-granddaughter Ruth, from whom King David and Solomon. So Balak merited actually to have the Messiah come from him, David and Shlomo. And as a consequence, he wasn't a nobody. What did he do? He merited to have the sacrifices. Because he brought these sacrifices to God, because he made offerings to God, 42 offerings. Again, there were 42 journeys in the wilderness, 42 lines of the Torah. That's why he merited to have a portion named after him, to have David and Ruth, to have Ruth and David and Solomon be his descendants. Let me just pause. I see April or Bruce says.
One more concept on the first verse, even before we get to the first verse. This is also a passage in the Torah which is unusual because it has nothing to do with the Jewish people are almost, they're not here. They are talked about, but there's no figure like Moshe. God's not speaking to Moshe. God's not speaking to Aaron. God's not speaking to any one of the people. He's talking to Bilam. How do we even know this incident even happened? Moshe wrote the whole Torah. So the Gemara in Baba Basra, Yudalid, Beis and Tetzvav Amud Aleph tells us that that Moshe Kosav Sifro Uparshas Bilam. Moshe wrote his book, which refers to the 5 books of Moses, and he also wrote this passage of Bilam. Meaning to say, we might have thought that Moshe didn't write this, that Bilam wrote this passage because he himself was a Navi. So we might have thought that Moshe couldn't have written this. So that's why the Talmud has to tell us, no, Moshe wrote this passage. And Rabbeinu Gershom Moragoa, he was a commentary on the Talmud even before Rashi. He lived from approximately 1040 to 940 to 1000, around then. So he says, was it 941? Maybe a little bit, actually, maybe in the early 11th century, where it was Rabbeinu Gershom. And Rabbeinu Gershom says, Afal pi shebilam gufa haya navi, even though Bilam himself was a prophet, Moshe wrote it. And the explanation for this, says the Sheris Menachem, is it says in the verse, Vayikar Hashem el Bilam, that God appeared to Bilam, Vayasam davar b'piv, and he put something in his mouth, and then he said, Vayomer shuv el Balak, and then Bilam says, go back to Balak and say v'cho tidaber. So God appeared to him, put words in his mouth, and he said, go back to Balak, and this is what you should say. Meaning to say, Bilam was only a vessel to repeat the holy words that came from God above, and he just repeated them. But since this vessel was spiritually impure, meaning Bilam was able to repeat the words of God, but he was spiritually impure, so therefore Moshe had to rewrite it. Moshe had to rewrite his prophecy in order to purify it. And he had to basically take it from a place of impurity to a place of purity. And so it was almost like he had to kosher the word. And so as a result of this, he brought these words that had been transmitted through impurity and he made them pure. This is one of the deep questions, which is, are we able to use something that comes from a negative source? Are we able to use the scientific knowledge we get from, let's say, immoral medical experimentation or whatever, immoral medical research? So in this case, the prophecy had to be purified. Okay, so now we go on to the first verse. So it says, Vayar Balak. So the question is, this is from Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. He asked the question. We know that Balak was the king of Moab, but only tells us that later on in the parasha. How come at the beginning of the portion it doesn't tell us? At the beginning of the portion, it doesn't tell us that he was the king. It was only afterwards. That, meaning to say, at the start of verse 2, it says, Balak ben Zippor saw all that the Jewish people did to the Amorites. And then in verse 4, it says, the Moabites said to the Midianites, now these people are going to surround us. Balak ben Zippor was the king of Moab at that time. And he sent messengers to Bilam ben Por. So Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik points out, it should have said Balak ben Zippor was the king of Moab in the first verse. Now it talks about, why does it only mention it in verse 4? So that's the question. And let me share with you his answer, because his answer is so true. Do you remember the answer, April? You remember the answer to this one? Okay. So this was a good one. Maybe I think I might have shared this in the past. It says like this. Because at the beginning, Balak was not the king. He wasn't a king at the beginning. He was just Balak. Only after he used his evil powers to speak negatively about the Jewish people, and then they chose him to be the king. He used his hatred of the Jewish people to forward his political strength. That's how he became king, by making the Jewish people his scapegoat, his foil. And that's the message here. He wasn't the king at the beginning of the portion. He became the king after the fact. How sad this is, that this is a true reality. We see time and time again that people use the Jewish people as a way of them. They're attacking the Jewish people as a way of improving their political position. Okay, so we'll stop here. God willing, we'll pick it up again on Wednesday. But Baruch Hashem, we'll stop here. Anybody have any questions?